The memory of a promise. I still remember that afternoon as if it were carved into my very bones. The air was warm, heavy with the smell of summer dust, and I was sitting on the worn wooden bench outside my old house. My son stood in front of me, tall and confident, the man I had raised with my own hands. His eyes held something soft that day, a gentleness I had not seen for years. "Father," he said, placing his hand firmly on my shoulder, "don't worry about anything anymore. You've carried the weight of this family your entire life. From now on, it's my turn. Come live with me. I'll take care of you. I promise." The word promise, how it echoed in my ears. My heart, weary from age and loneliness, leapt like a boy's again. I believed him with all the faith a father can give his child. After all, wasn't it the greatest gift of parenthood to know your son would one day stand where you once stood, protecting and providing? I remember nodding, unable to speak. My throat tightened, and for the first time in months, I felt tears welling not from pain, but from relief. My neighbors watched from across the fence, smiling as if they had witnessed something holy, a son honoring his father. I thought, this is how life should be. This is the circle completing itself. Inside me, memories stirred nights when he was still small, crying with fever, and I carried him on my back for miles to the clinic. Mornings when I skipped my own meals just to make sure he had enough rice in his lunchbox. Winters when I gave him my only coat so he wouldn't feel the bite of the cold. Those sacrifices were never spoken aloud, but I thought they were understood. I thought they were engraved in the invisible bond between us. And now, standing before me, my son was saying the very words I had longed to hear. "I'll take care of you." I let those words seep deep into me. They felt like the final reward for a lifetime of hard work and quiet endurance. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the scene again and again. I imagined dinners together, his laughter filling the house, the comfort of knowing I would not grow old in solitude. I pictured us sharing stories, the way I once told him bedtime tales when he was small. I believed his promise so completely that I slept with a rare peace, whispering into the darkness, "At last, I am not alone." Even now, I can still hear his voice, steady and warm. "Father, from now on, you'll never have to worry again." If only I had known how fragile words can be. If only I had known that a promise, no matter how heartfelt, can break like glass in the hands of time and neglect. My first days of hope. The very first morning I spent at my son's house felt like stepping into a new life. I woke up slowly, blinking against the soft sunlight that streamed through the curtains. The room was not mine, it smelled different. The sheets were stiffer, the furniture shinier, but I told myself it would soon feel like home. After all, wasn't this the beginning of a new chapter? I sat up on the edge of the bed, my bones aching as they always did, but lighter somehow, as if hope itself was holding me upright. I could hear faint sounds from the street outside, the laughter of children walking to school, the bark of a stray dog. For a brief moment, I thought I heard the clattering of dishes in the kitchen, and my heart warmed at the thought. My son is preparing breakfast for me. I shuffled slowly toward the kitchen, leaning on the wall for support. But when I arrived, the room was empty. The counters gleamed with untouched silence. On the table sat a single glass of water, nothing more. Still, I smiled to myself. Perhaps he had left early for work. Perhaps he would return with food later. I sat at the table, my fingers tracing the smooth surface, and I whispered, "It's all right. He has responsibilities. He is a busy man." I tried to believe those words, as if saying them aloud would make them true. That first day, I waited. I watched the clock tick its slow rhythm, the hands dragging across the face as though time itself shared my weariness. Noon came and went. My stomach grumbled, but my heart reassured me. He promised, he will come back soon. And indeed, as evening fell, he did return. The sound of the front door unlocking was like music to my ears. I stood up too quickly, my knees trembling, eager like a child awaiting his father after school. "Son," I called out, my voice weak but filled with relief. He appeared in the doorway, briefcase in hand, his face tired. He looked at me with a distracted half-smile. "Father, you're awake. Good. Sorry I'm late. Work is endless these days." I wanted to tell him I hadn't eaten all day, but when I saw the weariness etched into his face, I swallowed the words. Instead, I forced a smile. "That's all right, son. You work hard. I understand." He loosened his tie and glanced around the room. "I'll order something. Maybe later tonight." My heart accepted those crumbs of reassurance as though they were a feast. I nodded quickly, almost eagerly. "Yes, of course. I can wait." That night, though no food ever arrived, I went to bed with my heart strangely full. It was not the emptiness in my stomach that mattered, but the fullness of my hope. I told myself tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, he would remember. Tomorrow, he would sit with me at the table, and we would eat together like family. The second morning, I woke even earlier. I washed my face, combed my thinning hair, and sat neatly at the kitchen table as though preparing for a sacred ritual. I wanted to look presentable, to be ready when he entered with breakfast. I rehearsed in my mind what I would say. "Thank you, son. I am proud of you. You have made me feel cared for." But once again, the kitchen remained silent. Hours stretched long. My throat felt parched. The glass of water from yesterday still stood on the table, half full. I sipped it slowly, pretending it was enough, pretending it could fill the void gnawing inside me. In those first days, I lived on promises. Each time he said, "Father, soon we'll eat together," or "Just give me a little more time." I held on to those words as though they were bread themselves. I believed with all my heart that his busyness was temporary, that one day soon I would feel the warmth of his care, not only in words, but in actions. At night, as I lay in the unfamiliar bed, I would close my eyes and recall his promise. "I'll take care of you." I whispered it over and over, as though the repetition could transform it into reality. Those first days were built on hope, fragile, trembling hope. Hope that tomorrow would finally bring the fulfillment of his words. Hope that I was not a burden, but a father still cherished. Hope that the bond of blood could never be broken. But hope, I would come to learn, can be the cruelest hunger of all. The son's sweet words. It is strange how words can fill an empty stomach. I discovered that in those early weeks living with my son. Each time he spoke, I felt as if his voice itself was a kind of nourishment, even when his words carried no food, no comfort beyond sound. I remember one evening clearly. I was sitting in the living room, the shadows lengthening as the sun sank behind the rooftops. My body was weak from waiting all day with nothing but water to drink, yet my spirit quickened when I heard his key turn in the lock. He stepped inside, phone pressed to his ear, his tie loosened, his face flushed with the exhaustion of the world. Yes, I'll send the documents tomorrow," he muttered into the phone before glancing at me. His expression softened for a brief moment, and he mouthed, "Just a minute, Father." I waited patiently. I always waited. When at last he hung up, he dropped his briefcase with a sigh and walked toward me. "Father," he said, his tone tender, "I know I've been busy, but you must believe me, I'm doing all of this for us, for you." Those words pierced my chest with pride. I leaned forward in my chair, eager like a child. "For me?" I whispered. He smiled, though his eyes seemed far away. "Of course. Everything I do to make sure you are comfortable here, to give you the care you deserve." I felt tears prickling in the corners of my eyes. "You are a good son," I said softly. "Your mother would be proud." He placed a hand on my shoulder, warm but fleeting, like sunlight passing through a window. "Don't worry if I come home late, Father. Don't worry if dinner is delayed. The important thing is that you are here, with me, safe. Soon, everything will be better." Those were his sweet words, sugar-coating the hunger in my belly, honey masking the emptiness of the table. I swallowed them like precious medicine, each phrase dissolving slowly in my heart. "Don't worry. Soon, Everything will be better. But the nights told a different truth. I would lie in bed, my stomach growling angrily, pressing my palm against it as if to hush its cries. My son's words replayed in my mind, and I tried to feed on them, to let them fill the hollowness inside me. Once, I dared to ask, my voice trembling like a child asking for something forbidden. "Son, do you think we could eat together tomorrow? Just the two of us, like old times." He looked at me, surprised, then laughed gently. "Of course, Father. Why wouldn't we? Tomorrow, yes. We'll share a meal. Tomorrow." That word became a chain binding me to hope. Every day I clung to tomorrow, and every night tomorrow dissolved into silence. I remember another night when the hunger became unbearable. I rose quietly, my legs shaking, and searched the kitchen. The cupboards were nearly bare, but I found a small packet of crackers tucked behind some jars. I ate them slowly, ashamed of my desperation, terrified my son might see me scavenging like a beggar in his home. When he returned that night, I said nothing. Instead, I smiled at his familiar words. "Father, just trust me. I'm doing my best." And I believed him again. Always, I believed. His sweet words painted pictures of comfort, of family, of care. I clung to them like a drowning man clings to driftwood, refusing to see that the wood could never carry me to shore. Sweet words. That was all I had in those days. Words that tasted sweeter than any food, yet left me hungrier than ever. Moving into his house. The day I moved into my son's house was supposed to be a day of celebration, a day that marked the beginning of comfort after a lifetime of labor. I remember clutching the small suitcase that contained all I owned, just a few folded shirts, a worn jacket, a photograph of his mother, and a pair of shoes whose soles had nearly given up. I didn't need more. I told myself, I am not here for possessions. I am here for family. My son had come to fetch me in his car. I climbed in slowly, the leather seats too fine for my old clothes. He smiled, though his smile seemed hurried, as though already thinking of something else. "Father," he said, glancing at me through the rearview mirror, "you'll like it at my place. It's big, modern, no more worries for you." I nodded, clutching the handle of my suitcase tighter. "As long as you're there, son, I will be happy." The drive felt long, though perhaps it was only because my heart beat with nervousness. I stared at the houses flashing by, thinking about the years I had spent in my old, crumbling home, the roof patched with tin, the walls yellowed with age, the echoes of my wife's laughter still lingering within those walls. Leaving it behind felt like leaving part of myself. Yet, I told myself this was for the best. I was going to live with my son. What greater blessing could an old man ask for? When we arrived, I gazed up at the tall gates of his house, so different from the wooden fence I used to mend with my bare hands. The building towered proudly, its windows gleaming like eyes watching the street below. For a moment, I hesitated. Could this place ever truly be mine? My son noticed my pause and laughed. "Father, don't just stand there. Come in. This is your home now. Your home now." The words lifted me. I followed him inside, my feet echoing on polished floors. Everything smelled new, clean, sharp, almost too perfect. No trace of smoke from a wood stove, no scent of old rice cooking in a pot. It felt foreign, and yet I wanted to embrace it. He led me upstairs to a room at the end of the hall. "This will be yours," he said, pushing open the door. Inside was a bed with crisp white sheets, a wardrobe that seemed too large for my meager clothes, and a window overlooking the street. I set my suitcase on the floor, feeling small within the vast emptiness of the room. "It's beautiful," I whispered, though in truth, the silence pressed heavily against me. My old home had always been noisy with the sounds of live roosters crowing, neighbors calling out, my wife bustling in the kitchen. Here, the quiet was almost unsettling. My son patted my back lightly. "You'll get used to it, Father. Rest now. I'll take care of everything." Those words again, "I'll take care of everything." I smiled, believing him. I placed the photograph of my wife on the bedside table, her gentle face watching over me, and told her silently, "Don't worry, our son will look after me, just as we dreamed." That first night in his house, I lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the hum of distant traffic. The sheets smelled of detergent, not of home, and the pillow was too firm. Yet I forced myself to feel grateful. "I am safe," I whispered into the darkness. "I am with my son." I heard laughter downstairs, his laughter, bright and careless, as he spoke on the phone. I smiled, imagining he was telling someone proudly, "My father has come to live with me. I will care for him now." And though my stomach was empty, my heart was full. Moving into his house felt like moving into the future. I had always prayed for a future where loneliness no longer had a place, and where a son's promise was enough to light the rest of my days. Little did I know that same house, so grand and shining, would soon feel like a cage. The first night of silence. That night, the first night I truly spent under my son's roof, was unlike any other. I had imagined warmth, imagined the comfort of shared meals and conversations that stretched until midnight. I thought I would finally fall asleep to the sound of family around me. Instead, what I met was silence. After unpacking my few belongings, I sat on the edge of the bed, waiting. I could hear faint sounds from downstairs, my son moving about, the murmur of a television, the ring of his phone. My heart lifted at every noise, expecting him to call me down for dinner. I waited. Minutes slipped into an hour. My stomach twisted with hunger, but still I told myself, "He will call me soon. I must be patient." At last, I heard his footsteps coming up the stairs. My door opened slightly, and he peeked in, his face weary but kind. "Father, you're comfortable here, aren't you?" he asked. "Yes, son," I answered quickly, almost too quickly. "This room is more than I deserve." He smiled faintly, already glancing at his phone buzzing in his hand. "Good. Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow will be better." I hesitated, then said softly, Will we eat together?" He paused, as though the question caught him off guard. "Ah, I've already eaten, Father. There's some food in the fridge, if you'd like. I'll join you another time, I promise." And just like that, he was gone again. I sat there, the silence wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. I rose slowly and went to the kitchen. Opening the refrigerator, I found a container with cold rice and a few scraps of meat. I placed them on a plate and ate in silence, the hum of the refrigerator my only company. Every bite tasted of loneliness, of promises delayed. I looked at the empty chair across from me and tried to imagine my son sitting there, laughing, telling me stories of his day. But the chair remained empty, its silence louder than any noise. After finishing what little I could swallow, I returned to my room. The house was quiet now, except for the faint sound of my son's laughter drifting from behind closed doors. Laughter not shared with me, laughter I was no part of. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling. The room was too clean, too still. I missed the creak of my old wooden roof, the chirping of crickets outside my window, the faint rustle of my wife beside me in the dark. Here, there was only silence, thick and unyielding. I turned to the photograph of her on the bedside table. Her smile, forever frozen in time, met my eyes. "He promised," I whispered to her. "He said he would take care of me. Maybe tomorrow he will keep his word." But the silence answered me. That night, my hunger gnawed at me, but it was not the emptiness in my stomach that hurt the most. It was the emptiness of the room, the absence of his presence, the realization that promises could be postponed, even forgotten. Beneath the weight of busyness and distraction, I closed my eyes, repeating to myself like a prayer, "Tomorrow will be better. Tomorrow will be different." Yet in the depth of that first night, I felt a shiver of doubt. Silence has a way of speaking truths we do not wish to hear. The empty dining table. The dining table was the first thing I noticed the next morning. It was large, polished, and elegant, far grander than the old wooden table in my former home, which bore the stains of decades of meals, arguments, and laughter. This table gleamed as if it had never been touched by human hands. I stood by it in the early light, running my fingers across the smooth surface. There were no plates set out, no bowls of steaming rice, no teapot sending curls of warmth into the air. Just emptiness. The silence of the table struck me harder than hunger itself. I remembered how, in the past, our table had always been full, no matter how little we had. Even when money was scarce, my wife managed to place something on the table: a pot of thin soup, a basket of bread, even just sweet potatoes roasted over fire. The food was never abundant, but the love was. It was enough. Here, in my son's house, the table stood like a monument to absence. Around noon, I heard his footsteps rushing down the stairs. He was dressed smartly, his tie perfectly knotted. He grabbed a cup of coffee from the counter and headed toward the door. "Son," I called softly, "will we eat together today?" He paused, his hand already on the doorknob. He looked back at me with a fleeting smile. "Not today, Father. I have an important meeting. But don't worry, I'll bring something tonight." The door shut before I could answer. I sat down at the table alone. My reflection stared back at me in its polished surface, an old man with sunken eyes, waiting like a guest in his own son's home. The room was silent, except for the ticking of a clock that seemed to mock me with its steady rhythm. That day, I opened the refrigerator and found a single plate of cold noodles. I placed it on the table, trying to pretend it was a real meal. I sat in one of the chairs, then, instinctively, looked at the chair opposite me. Empty. Always empty. I tried to imagine him sitting there, chopsticks in hand, smiling at me, telling me about his day. I even spoke aloud, just to fill the silence. "How was work today, son?" I whispered into the void. "Are you tired? You work too hard." But my voice fell flat against the walls. The chair answered me with nothing. As days turned into weeks, the dining table became my closest companion. I began to dread its emptiness. Yet, I could not abandon it. Each evening, I would set myself a plate, no matter how little there was to eat. I would sit in silence, staring at the untouched place across from me, and whisper prayers that one day he would finally join me. Once, late at night, I overheard him laughing downstairs with friends. I crept quietly to the staircase and peeked. He and his guests were gathered in the living room, glasses of wine in their hands, plates of food spread before them. They were eating, drinking, laughing, and I, his father, was not invited. I wanted to step forward, to ask if I could join, but something inside me froze. I felt as though I were an intruder in my own son's house. So I turned back to my room, closing the door gently behind me. That night, I sat once more at the empty dining table, but I could not eat. Instead, I stared at the polished surface until my own reflection blurred through my tears. An empty table. It was more than just a piece of furniture. It was a mirror of my place in his life. I was there, but unseen, present, but unnecessary. And yet, even in the silence, I clung to hope. I told myself, one day, he will sit with me. One day, this table will no longer be empty. But deep inside, the emptiness had already begun to spread. "Father, I'll be home soon." It was a late evening when the words first slipped from his mouth. Simple, almost careless. Yet they carved themselves deep into my memory. "Father, I'll be home soon," he said, already halfway out the door, his phone pressed tightly to his ear. His suit jacket swung loosely from his shoulders, and his briefcase knocked against his leg as he hurried down the steps. He did not even look at me when he said it. I remember standing by the hallway, clutching the edge of the wooden railing, nodding as though he had made me a solemn promise. Those words filled me with a sudden, almost childish excitement. He'll be home soon, I thought. We will sit together tonight. Perhaps he will bring food. Perhaps we will talk the way we used to. I waited. The clock in the living room ticked louder than usual. The hands crawled forward, 8, 9, 10 each hour, dragging the weight of my hunger and my loneliness with it. At 10:30, I boiled a small pot of water, just in case he came with noodles or vegetables to share. By 11, the water had gone cold. By midnight, I could no longer keep my eyes open. I sat, slumped at the table, head resting on my folded arms, listening for the sound of his footsteps outside. But the night stayed silent. When I woke, it was already morning. The chair across from me remained empty, untouched, its silence heavier than stone. The promise he made, "I'll be home soon," still echoed in my head, hollow and mocking. The next day, he repeated it again. "Father, I'll be home soon." The same words, the same hurried tone, the same rush of footsteps disappearing through the door, and once again, I believed him. I waited longer this time. I did not want to miss his arrival. I sat by the window, watching cars pass, headlights sweeping across the pavement like fleeting stars. I told myself, any moment now, he will walk through that door, smiling, apologizing for being late. But he did not come. Instead, when I woke from an accidental doze, I found the sun already creeping into the sky, and my stomach aching with emptiness. I forced myself to eat a piece of stale bread from the corner of the cupboard, chewing slowly, swallowing not just food but disappointment. Days turned into weeks, and the phrase became routine. "Father, I'll be home soon." Each time, I wanted to believe it. Each time, I clung to the hope that this night would be different, that this time, he would walk through the door with warm food, sit beside me, and let me feel like a father again, instead of a forgotten relic in his home. Once, I gathered the courage to ask him directly. "Son," I said softly, stopping him as he put on his shoes, "when you say you'll be home soon, do you mean tonight? Or tomorrow?" He barely glanced at me, already adjusting his tie in the mirror. "Tonight, Father. Don't worry." I wanted to smile, but my lips trembled. "Then, I'll wait for you." He patted my shoulder quickly, like one might comfort a child. Then, he left, the door closing behind him with its usual sharp click. That night, I prepared the table as best I could. I even found 2 bowls and set them across from one another. I placed chopsticks carefully, aligning them so that nothing seemed out of place. The effort filled me with a quiet sense of anticipation, but midnight passed. The bowls remained untouched. The chopsticks, perfectly aligned, never moved, and when dawn finally broke, the table looked like a cruel stage, where no actors had arrived to play their part. I whispered into the empty room, as though speaking to him. "Soon. How soon is soon, my son? How many nights must I wait for soon to arrive?" The silence answered me again, and still, like a fool, I waited, because every father, no matter how broken, clings to the hope that his child will one day return home not just with his body, but with his heart. The nights of waiting. The nights grew longer after that. Each evening, I told myself I would not wait, that I would go to bed early and spare my heart the ache of disappointment. Yet as soon as the clock struck 7, my body betrayed me. I found myself wandering to the dining table, straightening the chairs, and preparing for a meal that never came. It became a ritual of sorts. I would sit by the window, the curtains half drawn, watching the street outside. Shadows stretched across the pavement, and the faint glow of passing cars painted fleeting streaks of light on the walls. The sound of footsteps echoed occasionally, neighbors returning from work, children laughing as they played late into the evening, but none of them belonged to him. The hours passed slowly. At 9, I would tell myself, perhaps he is stuck in traffic. At 10, I would whisper, maybe a meeting ran late. By 11, my heart would begin to falter, and still I clung to his promise. "Father, I'll be home soon." Sometimes I would prepare food to keep myself awake, a small pot of rice or boiled vegetables. I placed them carefully on the table, arranging them as though they were offerings on an altar. I wanted the scene to be ready for his arrival, the bowls waiting, the chopsticks aligned, the warmth of food still lingering. But by midnight, the dishes had grown cold, and the smell of wilted vegetables filled the air. I could not bring myself to throw the food away immediately. Instead, I left it there, untouched, as if by doing so I could still pretend he might arrive at any moment. Only when dawn broke, when sunlight pierced through the blinds and revealed the truth of my solitude, did I finally clear the table. My hands trembled as I scraped the food into the trash, each bite uneaten like a fragment of my hope discarded. One night, I thought I heard his key turning in the lock. My heart leapt. I rushed to the door, my face breaking into a smile I had not felt in months. But when I opened it, there was no one there, just the hollow sound of wind and the creak of the door frame. My knees nearly gave out from the weight of disappointment. I whispered to myself, "Perhaps tomorrow," he said soon. Tomorrow must be soon. But tomorrow came and went, and the next, and the next. My body began to weaken from the nights of waiting, from the lack of proper meals. Sleep became shallow, hunger gnawed at me constantly. But the deeper wound was not in my stomach, it was in my chest, where love and hope battled against loneliness and betrayal. I sometimes dreamed of him as a boy. In my dreams, he was small again, tugging at my sleeve, asking me to come home quickly after work. "Don't be late, Father," he would say with his innocent eyes. I always kept that promise then. I always came home. And now, as the years have passed and our roles reversed, I find myself repeating his words in silence. "Don't be late, son. Please, don't be late." But the nights remained the same, quiet, heavy, and endless. Nights of waiting, nights of hunger, nights where the only sound was the steady ticking of the clock, marking the passage of time that seemed to stretch forever. I realized then that waiting was not just about hoping for someone to arrive. Waiting was a test of endurance, a slow unraveling of the heart. Each night chipped away at me, piece by piece, until I was nothing more than an old man sitting at an empty table, listening for footsteps that never came. And still, I waited, because even as disappointment piled upon disappointment, a father's love refused to die. It clung stubbornly to the faintest spark, whispering to me that maybe tonight will be different, even when I knew it would not. The first missed promise that broke me. I remember it clearly, because it was the first night when hope didn't just fade, it shattered. That evening, my son had looked me in the eye, not over his shoulder, not while distracted with his phone, but directly, as though he truly meant what he said. His hand had even rested briefly on mine, the warmth of his touch sparking a fragile ember inside my chest. "Father," he said with unusual gentleness, "tonight, I promise, we'll have dinner together, just you and me." The words wrapped around me like a blanket. I clung to them as though they were lifelines, believing with all the faith a father could muster. I nodded slowly, my lips trembling into a smile that felt unfamiliar after so many lonely days. "All right, son," I whispered. "I'll wait for you." From the moment he left, my preparation began. I opened the cupboard and searched for whatever little I could find. Rice, a few eggs, some greens that were starting to wilt. It wasn't much, but I arranged it all with the care of a man hosting a feast. I washed the rice 3 times, my fingers stiff but determined. I cut the vegetables as thinly as I could, though my hands shook from weakness. When I fried the eggs, I tried to make them golden and crisp, the way he used to like them as a boy. The house filled with smells I had not sensed in months. The smell of warmth, of a home where meals were shared, of a father trying to reclaim the smallest piece of love. By 7, the table was set. 2 bowls, 2 pairs of chopsticks, steam rising gently from the dishes. I sat down, my heart swelling with anticipation. I glanced at the clock every few minutes, each tick echoing in the chambers of my chest. 7:30. No sound of footsteps. 8 o'clock. Still no knock at the door. At 9, I told myself he must be caught in traffic. At 10, I reassured myself that perhaps he had an unexpected meeting. But when the hands of the clock crept past 11, doubt began to seep into my bones. I rose from the table and walked slowly to the window. Outside, the world was dark and still. A stray dog nosed through the garbage bins, its hollow eyes searching for scraps. I felt an odd kinship with it. Two creatures, waiting for something that might never come. I returned to the table, forcing myself to stay awake. "He promised," I murmured aloud, gripping the edge of the chair. "He promised me tonight." Midnight arrived. The food had gone cold, the rice hardened, the vegetables limp. I touched the empty chair across from me, my fingers tracing its edges as if by doing so I could summon him to fill it. But the chair stayed silent, mocking me with its emptiness. When the clock struck 1 in the morning, I broke. The ember of hope that had carried me through so many nights extinguished with a hiss. Tears, hot and unrelenting, rolled down my cheeks, soaking the sleeve of my shirt as I buried my face in my hands. It wasn't just the food wasted or the hours lost. It was the betrayal of a promise spoken not carelessly, but with eyes that had once looked at me like a son looking at a father. For the first time, I realized that maybe his words meant nothing anymore. That night, I couldn't bring myself to eat. I cleared the table slowly, my hands trembling, each clatter of dishes echoing like thunder in the silence of the house. The food went into the trash, uneaten, just like the love I had prepared for him. When I finally lay down in bed, my stomach empty and my heart heavier than stone, I whispered into the darkness, "Why, son? Why promise what you never intend to keep? Do you not know that I live for these words?" The darkness gave no answer. From that night on, something inside me changed. I still waited, yes, but not with the same pure hope. A shadow of doubt lingered, poisoning every promise he made. And though a father's heart always forgives, it never forgets the first wound that taught it how easily love can be broken. The growing distance between us. After that first broken promise, I began to notice the distance more clearly, not just in his absence at the table, but in every small gesture, every fleeting word, every moment that revealed how far apart we had grown despite living under the same roof. He still greeted me in the mornings, but his greetings were thin, fragile, like paper about to tear. "Good morning, Father," he would say quickly, eyes already fixed on his phone. His voice carried no warmth, no weight, just routine. I tried to respond with the fullness of my heart, hoping my words could bridge the gap. "Good morning, son. Did you sleep well? Don't forget your scarf, it's cold outside today." But he hardly heard me. He would nod distractedly, his fingers dancing across the glowing screen, and then the door would shut behind him before my words could truly land. The house would fall into silence again. My voice, it seemed, no longer had the power to reach him. It was in the evenings, though, that the distance hurt most. Sometimes I would hear the sound of his laughter outside, or catch a glimpse of him returning late with friends. Their voices were lively, filled with the kind of energy youth carries so effortlessly. I longed to be part of it, not to intrude, but to simply sit near, to hear his laughter directed at me again as it had been when he was a boy. But the front door always closed before I could step out. He never thought to invite me, never thought that his father might crave even a sliver of companionship. There were nights when he came home and went straight upstairs without saying a word. I would sit in the living room, waiting to hear the creak of the floorboards, the sign that he was descending to join me for dinner. But the creak never came. His footsteps went only upward, away from me, into a world I was no longer part of. I began to notice the physical signs of his withdrawal. His eyes rarely met mine anymore. His conversations, when they happened, were clipped and shallow. Even his body language shifted. He leaned away when I tried to touch his arm. He kept his distance when we passed each other in the hallway. It was as though I were a fragile artifact, something to be handled with care but never truly touched. One evening, I tried to stop him before he left for yet another night out. "Son," I said gently, "it has been a long time since we sat together. Would you stay in tonight? Just the two of us?" He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in weeks. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes, but it was gone before I could be sure. "Not tonight, father," he replied firmly, though not unkindly. "I have things to do." And then he was gone. The distance grew like a wall between us, brick by brick, laid down by every excuse, every absence, every unfulfilled promise. And though I reached out again and again, my hands could no longer touch him. I sometimes wondered if I had done something wrong. Had I failed him in some way as a father? Was there a wound I did not know I had caused, one that now kept him away? I replayed our past in my mind, searching for mistakes, for moments that could explain the coldness, but memory only showed me years of love, sacrifice, and devotion. Perhaps, I thought, it was not me he was rejecting, it was the burden of my old age. Perhaps he did not know how to bear the sight of me, fragile and dependent, a constant reminder that time spares no one. Still, the thought cut deep. Because I had once been his shelter, his provider, his source of comfort, and now, in the twilight of my life, I was little more than an unwanted presence still here, but fading in significance. The growing distance between us was not measured in steps or rooms, but in silence. Silence at the table. Silence in the hallway. Silence in the spaces where a father's love should have been met with a son's gratitude. And in that silence, I felt myself shrinking day by day, word by word, into nothingness. The night I heard him laugh without me. It was a Friday evening when I first heard it, the sound of my son's laughter ringing through the walls. Not the quiet chuckles he sometimes gave me out of politeness, but a full, unrestrained laugh. The kind of laugh that comes from deep within, that bubbles up with joy. For a moment, my heart soared. I thought, he is happy finally, he is happy. Perhaps he would come to me, share the reason for his laughter. Let me be part of his joy. A father always longs to hear his child laugh, no matter how old that child becomes. But the laughter did not come from our table, or from the living room where I sat waiting. It came from outside, beyond the front door. Curious, I shuffled to the window. Through the thin curtains, I saw him standing by his car with a group of friends. They were young, vibrant, their clothes fashionable, their voices carrying easily into the night. In his hand was a bottle of wine, and he tilted it toward his friend, grinning as they spoke. I pressed my palm against the glass, as if I could reach him through it. For years, I had dreamed of such moments, hearing him carefree, unburdened, alive with joy. But now, I realized something I had been avoiding. His laughter no longer needed me. It lived out there, in a world where I was not invited. One of his friends said something, and they all burst into laughter again. The sound stabbed into me like 1,000 little needles. How long had it been since I had heard him laugh like that with me? Months? Years? The more I listened, the more I noticed the sharp contrast. Inside the house, silence hung heavy, broken only by the ticking of the clock. Outside, there was life, voices, laughter, music from a car radio, the clinking of glasses. I was surrounded by walls, yet it felt as though I were trapped in a cage while the world went on without me. I thought about opening the door, stepping out, and saying, "Son, may I join you for a while?" But my hand froze on the doorknob. What if he said no? What if he looked at me the way a host looks at an uninvited guest? The fear of rejection kept me rooted in place. So, instead, I returned to the table. I sat in my chair, staring at the empty bowl before me, listening to the echoes of joy that were not mine to share. Each burst of laughter outside was a reminder of my own loneliness inside. At one point, I heard him call out, his voice loud and playful. "Let's go! The night is still young." The sound of car doors slamming shut followed. Then, the engine roared to life, headlights sweeping briefly across the walls of the house before fading into the distance. Silence returned, heavy, crushing. I sat there long after they were gone, staring into the darkened window where my reflection looked back at me. My face was pale, my eyes sunken, and in the dim light, I hardly recognized myself. "Do you still remember me, son?" I whispered. "Do you remember how I once made you laugh?" The only answer was the faint creak of the house settling into the night. That was the night I realized the laughter of my son no longer belonged to me. It belonged to his friends, to the world beyond our walls, to moments I was never meant to share. And in that realization, a new kind of loneliness settled over me, one deeper, sharper than hunger or silence. The loneliness of knowing that your child's joy exists, but you are no longer part of it. The day I tried to cook for him again, it had been weeks, maybe months, since I last attempted to cook a proper meal. Most days, I survived on scraps, bread gone stale, a handful of rice, whatever small thing I could find to fill my stomach. But the memory of that night when he laughed outside without me weighed heavily on my heart, and I found myself yearning, desperate for a way to bridge the distance between us. And so, one morning, I made a decision. Tonight, I will cook for him. Tonight, I will remind him of who we once were. The idea gave me strength I hadn't felt in a long time. I rose early, my bones aching but my spirit alive with determination. I rummaged through the kitchen, searching every cupboard, every drawer, for ingredients. There wasn't much left, but I gathered what I could: rice, a few onions, 2 eggs, some herbs wilting in the back of the fridge. It wasn't much, but I told myself it would be enough. As I washed the rice, I remembered his childhood. He had always loved the meals I cooked. He would sit cross-legged at our old wooden table, his eyes wide with anticipation as the smell of garlic and herbs filled the air. "Father, this is my favorite," he used to shout, clapping his little hands. I wanted no. I needed to hear those words again. By afternoon, the house was alive with the scent of food. I fried the onions until they turned golden, added the rice, and stirred carefully, humming softly to myself. The sizzle of the pan was like music, echoing memories of better days. For the first time in years, the kitchen felt warm, like a home again. I set the table meticulously: 2 bowls, 2 pairs of chopsticks, a small plate of herbs to garnish. I even found an old candle tucked away in a drawer and lit it, letting its soft glow cast a gentle light across the polished surface. It was not much, but it looked like celebration, like hope. When evening came, I sat at the table, waiting. My hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from anticipation. At 7 o'clock, I heard the front door creak open. My heart leapt. He was home. "Son," I called softly, my voice quivering, "I made dinner for us tonight. Come, sit." He stepped into the dining room, still holding his phone, his tie loosened, his face weary from work. His eyes flickered to the table, to the food steaming gently in the bowls. For a moment, I thought I saw something soften in his expression. But then, just as quickly, it vanished. "Father," he said, his voice flat, "I already ate." The words hit me like a blade. I forced a smile, though my throat tightened. "Just a little, then. Please, I made it for you." He shook his head, already moving toward the stairs. "I'm tired. Maybe another time." I sat frozen as his footsteps faded. The food on the table steamed quietly, the candle flickering against the growing darkness. I stared at the empty chair across from me, the same chair I had stared at so many nights before. My chopsticks slipped from my hands and clattered against the bowl. The sound echoed through the room, louder than it should have been, like the shattering of glass. I whispered to myself, "Another time." He said another time. But deep down, I knew another time would never come. The food grew cold. The candle burned low, then sputtered out. And once again, I sat alone, staring at a table set for 2 that would never be shared. That night, when I finally rose to clear the dishes, I could barely carry them. My hands shook, not from age, but from the weight of despair. I scraped the food into the trash, each spoonful like tearing a piece from my own heart. And as I washed the empty bowls, I realized something I had never dared admit before. Perhaps my son no longer wanted my love at all. The forgotten birthday. I had always believed that birthdays carried a sacred meaning, not because of gifts, not because of cake, but because they were reminders of belonging, of being remembered. When my wife was alive, she would make a simple meal every year on my birthday, and the house would ring with laughter. Even after she passed, my son used to bring home something, a small gift, a sweet word, even just a warm hug. But this year, when my birthday came, there was only silence. The morning light slipped through the curtains as I opened my eyes and realized the date. My heart stirred with cautious hope. Surely, he will remember. He must. I imagined him coming into my room with a smile, perhaps saying, "Happy birthday, Father." Maybe we would share breakfast together, even just for a few minutes. I dressed carefully that day, wearing my old but clean shirt, the one my wife had always said made me look dignified. I combed my thinning hair and sat in the living room, waiting. The house was unusually quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock on the wall. Hours passed. Noon came. My son had already left for work without a word, his footsteps brisk and his voice hurried as he spoke into his phone on the way out. I sat there, watching the door close behind him, telling myself, he will remember later. He is just busy. To fill the silence, I took out an old photo album. Inside were pictures of him as a boy, his tiny hands clutching mine, his smile wide and full of innocence. I traced his face with my finger, remembering the way he once shouted, "Father, you're my hero." My chest ached as I whispered, "Do you still believe that?" By evening, my anticipation had grown into desperation. I set the table once more, though this time it was far simpler than the night before. Just a small bowl of rice and a cup of tea. I didn't even light a candle. I told myself I didn't need a feast. All I wanted was acknowledgement. Just a word. Just his voice, saying he still remembered me. The door opened late that night. I straightened immediately, forcing a smile, my hands trembling slightly as I stood. "Son," I said softly, Did you know what day it is?" He glanced at me briefly, tired. His tie loosened again, his shoulders sagging. "It's Wednesday," he muttered. My heart sank. "Yes," I replied, my voice barely audible. "It is Wednesday. But it is also—" My throat tightened, and I could hardly bring myself to say it. "My birthday." For a moment, silence hung between us. He blinked, as if the thought had never occurred to him. Then he gave a small, distracted nod. "Ah, happy birthday, Father. Sorry, I forgot. It's been a busy day." And with that, he went upstairs, leaving me standing in the living room, the words echoing in my ears. "Sorry, I forgot." I sank back into my chair. The house felt heavier than ever before. I stared at the untouched bowl of rice, at the cup of tea growing cold. A single tear slipped down my cheek, and I wiped it away quickly, ashamed of my own weakness. I whispered into the empty air, "How can a son forget the day his father was born? How can he forget the day that made his own life possible?" The clock ticked on, steady and merciless. Midnight came and went. My birthday ended not with laughter, not with love, but with the sound of silence swallowing me whole. And for the first time in my long life, I truly felt invisible. The night the lights went out. The night began like any other, quiet, heavy with the stillness of loneliness. I sat in the living room, staring at the faded wallpaper, listening to the ticking of the old clock that seemed louder with every passing hour. My body was weary, my spirit even more so, but I clung to the rhythm of those ticks, as though they were proof I still existed in a world that had long forgotten me. Then, without warning, everything went dark. The house shuddered as the electricity failed. The hum of the refrigerator ceased. The faint glow of the hallway light disappeared, and I was left surrounded by an oppressive silence, broken only by the rapid beating of my heart. I froze, panic clawing at my chest. At my age, darkness feels different. It is not the same darkness of youth, filled with mystery or adventure. It is suffocating, a reminder of fragility, a whisper of death. "Son," I called out into the blackness, my voice shaking. There was no answer, I fumbled for the armrest of my chair, trying to steady myself as I stood. My knees trembled, but I forced my body to move, inch by inch, toward the kitchen, where I remembered leaving an old candle. Each step felt like a journey across mountains. My hands stretched out in front of me, brushing against walls, furniture, anything to guide me. I finally reached the counter and pulled open a drawer with trembling fingers. Inside, my hands found what I was looking for, a candle, stubby and worn, but still usable. I searched again, more frantically this time, until I touched the cold, metallic shape of a lighter. Relief washed over me as the small flame flared to life, casting a fragile glow against the suffocating black. The candlelight flickered, illuminating the room in soft, wavering shadows. I held it carefully, cradling it like it was the last source of hope in the world. Moments later, I heard the front door slam. My son entered, muttering angrily to himself, still glued to his phone. He barely noticed the darkness or the faint candlelight. "Power's out," I said quietly, my voice carrying both fear and hope that he might finally look at me. He glanced briefly, irritation etched across his face. "Yeah, I can see that. It's just a blackout. They'll fix it." I hesitated, then whispered, Would you sit with me? Just until the lights return?" He frowned, shaking his head as though the suggestion itself was absurd. "I've got work to finish. My phone has enough battery. I'll use the flashlight." And with that, he disappeared upstairs, leaving me once again in the flickering shadows. I stood there, holding the candle, staring at the stairwell where he had vanished. My chest ached not just from the loneliness, but from the memory of years ago, when a blackout meant something entirely different. I remembered one night, decades earlier, when he was just a boy. The lights had gone out then too, and he had clung to me, afraid of the dark. I lit a candle just like this one and told him stories, my voice calm, my arms wrapped around him. He laughed when I made the shadows dance on the walls. He felt safe because I was there, and now, here I was, old, frail, clutching the same kind of candle, longing for the safety of his presence. But he had left me alone. The hours dragged on. The candle burned lower, the shadows growing longer and more distorted on the walls. I sat in my chair, the silence pressing against me, wondering how something as simple as darkness could reveal the vast distance between a father and his son. When the power finally returned, lights flickering back to life, I almost wished they hadn't. The brightness illuminated the truth too harshly, that I had sat alone in fear, while the son I had once comforted now chose to abandon me. That night, as I blew out the candle, I felt as though I was extinguishing the last ember of hope in my heart. The neighbor, who knocked the day after the blackout, I sat by the window, my body heavy and my spirit worn thin. The world outside seemed alive with colors, children running down the street, neighbors exchanging greetings, the sound of a distant radio playing a cheerful tune. But inside my home, silence wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. I hadn't expected anything unusual that day. My son had already rushed off to work without so much as a good morning. The loneliness was familiar by now, almost like an old, unwanted companion. I told myself I could endure it, just as I had endured so many other days. But then, there was a sound I hadn't heard in a long time. A knock at the door, 3 soft taps. I froze. Who could it be? Visitors had become strangers to this house. My friends were either gone or too far away. Family, what little of it remained, was silent. My first thought was that it must be a mistake. The knock came again, firmer this time. Slowly, with effort, I rose from my chair and shuffled toward the door. My hands shook as I grasped the handle and pulled it open. Standing there was Mrs. Alvarez, the woman who lived 2 houses down. She was holding a small basket covered with a cloth, her eyes kind yet troubled as they studied my face. "Good morning, sir," she said gently. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." I blinked, stunned. No, of course not. Please, come in." She stepped inside, Glancing around the dim living room as though measuring the silence that lived there, she placed the basket on the table and pulled back the cloth, revealing fresh bread and fruit. "I noticed last night during the blackout. I saw the candlelight through your window. You were alone, weren't you?" Her voice was not accusatory, only filled with quiet concern. I tried to smile, but my lips trembled. "Yes, my son was home, but he had work." Mrs. Alvarez's eyes softened. She didn't press further, but the way she looked at me said she already knew more than I wanted to admit. "I thought perhaps you could use this," she said, gesturing to the basket. "It's nothing much, just something fresh to eat." Tears burned my eyes, unbidden and uncontrollable. I hadn't realized how starved I was, not just for food, but for kindness. My voice broke as I whispered, "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me." She smiled gently and patted my hand. "We all need someone to check on us now and then. Don't ever feel you are forgotten." For a moment, I felt warmth I hadn't felt in years. A stranger, well, not a stranger, but not family either, had remembered me, cared enough to notice me when my own son did not. We spoke for a while, simple conversation, nothing extraordinary. She asked about my health, about my wife, about the years gone by. I found myself talking, really talking, for the first time in so long that my throat ached from the effort. When she finally left, promising to stop by again, I sat alone with the basket on the table. I stared at the bread, the fruit, and realized how small gestures could pierce the darkest despair. But along with the gratitude came another, sharper ache, the realization that a neighbor's kindness felt more like love than the presence of my own flesh and blood. That night, I whispered to myself, "How strange it is that the world outside this house sees me more clearly than the one who lives inside it." And as I ate the bread slowly, piece by piece, I wondered if my son even noticed there was someone who had cared for me when he had not. The phone call I waited for. There was a time when the sound of the telephone was enough to make my heart race with joy. In the past, it meant my wife calling me while she was out shopping, or my son phoning to say he'd be home late from school, or perhaps an old friend reaching out just to hear my voice. Those were the days when the world still felt connected to me, when I mattered to someone. But in recent years, the telephone had become little more than an ornament. It sat on the small table in the hallway, collecting dust, its silence louder than any ring it could produce. Still, each day I found myself glancing at it, waiting, hoping. I told myself, one day he will call me. He will pick up the phone at his office and remember I am here. He will say, "Father, how are you?" That thought alone carried me through countless lonely afternoons. Then, one evening, as I sat staring at the darkening sky through the window, the silence broke. The telephone rang. The sound startled me so much that my hands shook, and for a moment I could only stare at it, my heart pounding as though I had been awoken from a dream. It rang again, sharp and insistent, and I scrambled to my feet, my legs unsteady but driven by desperate hope. I lifted the receiver to my ear, my voice trembling. "Hello? Son?" There was a pause, and then his voice came through, hurried, distracted, but undeniably his. "Father." I nearly wept just to hear him. "Oh, my son. I'm so glad you called. I've been waiting." "Listen," he interrupted, his tone clipped. "I don't have much time. I just wanted to let you know I'll be late tonight. Don't wait up for me." My breath caught in my throat. That was all? After weeks, months of silence, that was all? "Son," I whispered, Could you talk with me? Just for a moment? I don't mind if you're busy. Father," I said, "I don't have time. I have a meeting. I'll see you tomorrow." And before I could speak another word, the line went dead. I stood there with the receiver still pressed to my ear, the silence on the other end heavier than stone. Slowly, I lowered it back into place, the sound of it clicking down, echoing through the empty house. My body trembled, but not from weakness. It was the tremble of a heart that had reached out desperately and found nothing in return. I sank into the chair in the hallway, burying my face in my hands. He had called, yes, but not because he thought of me, not because he missed me. He called only to excuse his absence. I whispered to the empty room, "Is this all I am to you now? An afterthought? A duty you can't wait to avoid?" That night, I didn't eat. I didn't even light the candle I had come to rely on for comfort. I simply sat in the darkness, staring at the silent telephone, waiting for it to ring again, knowing deep down it would not. The house seemed to breathe around me, every creak and sigh of its old wooden frame reminding me of the silence that had taken root in my life. I thought of the years I had spent providing for him, the sacrifices made, the nights I worked late so he could eat and study. And now, all I had left was a hollow sound in my ear, a few hurried words, and a silence that stretched longer than the years of my sacrifice. It was then I realized, sometimes, the call you wait for is worse than the silence itself. The illness I tried to hide. It began with something small, a cough that lingered, a sharp ache in my chest when I climbed the stairs, a dizziness that came without warning. At first, I ignored it. I told myself it was nothing, just age creeping in as it always does. But the truth is, I knew better. My body was failing me in ways I couldn't admit out loud. Each morning, I would sit on the edge of my bed, struggling to steady my breath before rising. My hands trembled when I held the teacup. My legs quivered when I walked to the window. The man I once was the strong father who carried his son on his shoulders, who built this very house with sweat and pride, seemed like a distant memory, fading faster than I could grasp. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to say, "Son, I am not well. I need you." But every time I saw his face, his eyes already distracted, his voice already burdened with work and impatience, the words dissolved in my throat. I feared that if I showed him my weakness, he would turn away completely. So I hid it. I coughed into my sleeve when he was around. I rose earlier than usual so he wouldn't see how slowly I dressed. I forced myself to smile at him, to nod, to pretend everything was fine. And when he left for work each morning, I collapsed back into the chair, gasping for breath, clutching my chest in silence. The nights were the worst. Alone in my room, the pain sharpened. Sometimes I woke in the dark, drenched in sweat, my body trembling, my heart pounding so violently I thought it would burst. I would press my hand against my ribs and whisper prayers into the emptiness, begging God to let me survive until morning. One evening, as I tried to cook myself a simple meal, the dizziness struck harder than ever. The room spun, the pot slipped from my hand, and boiling water splashed across the floor. I fell against the counter, gripping it desperately, fighting to stay upright. For a terrifying moment, I thought I would collapse entirely. "Father, what happened?" His voice startled me. I hadn't heard him come home. He stood in the doorway, staring at the mess. The pot on the floor, the water, the trembling in my hands I could not hide. I forced a weak smile. "Nothing, son. Just clumsy." I dropped it. "That's all." He frowned but didn't move closer. His eyes lingered only long enough to show mild annoyance. "You should be more careful. You'll hurt yourself." Then, without another word, he turned and went upstairs, the sound of his footsteps fading once again. I stood there, heart aching, not just from the illness but from his indifference. How could he not see? How could he not hear the weakness in my voice, the struggle in every movement I made? Or perhaps he did see, and simply chose not to care. That night, as I lay in bed, coughing into the darkness, I realized I was fighting two battles. One against my failing body, and one against the silence of a son who no longer wished to carry the weight of his father. And between the two, I did not know which would claim me first. The night I fell. It was late, later than I usually stayed awake. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock, steady and merciless. My body was restless that night, my chest tight, my legs weak. Sleep would not come, So, I decided to fetch a glass of water from the kitchen. I told myself it was nothing, just a short walk down the hallway. I had done it 1,000 times before, but that night, my body betrayed me. The floor seemed uneven beneath my feet, the air heavy as though it resisted each breath. My hand brushed the wall for balance, but even then I staggered, every step a struggle. By the time I reached the kitchen doorway, the dizziness struck with sudden, brutal force. The world tilted. I remember the sound first, the crash of my body against the floor, the shattering of glass as it slipped from my trembling hands. Pain seared through my hip and shoulder, sharp and unforgiving. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My chest ached as though the fall had stolen the very air from my lungs. "Son," I cried out, my voice breaking. "Son, please." The silence that followed was unbearable. I tried to lift myself, but my body would not obey. My arms shook violently, my legs crumpled beneath me. I lay there on the cold floor, the broken glass glinting in the faint light from the window, my cheek pressed against the unforgiving tiles. The house seemed to mock me with its stillness. Again, I called his name, louder this time, desperation bleeding into every syllable. "Son, help me." At last, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Relief surged through me. He was coming. He would see me. He would help me. He appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he simply stared at me, sprawled on the floor, the shards of glass scattered around, my body trembling. "Father," he said, his tone sharp with annoyance. "What are you doing down there?" Tears welled in my eyes, not just from pain but from the sting of his words. "I fell," I whispered. "Please, help me up." With a sigh, he stepped into the kitchen, avoiding the shards as though they were more dangerous than the broken man before him. He reached down and gripped my arm, pulling me roughly to my feet. My legs wobbled, my breath came in gasps, but I clung to him for balance. "Careful," I muttered weakly, terrified I would fall again. He rolled his eyes. "You should be more careful. You can't keep doing this." His words were sharp, but his hands let go too quickly. I stumbled into the nearest chair, collapsing into it with a groan. "Do you need a doctor?" he asked flatly, as though it were an inconvenience. I shook my head, though every bone in my body screamed otherwise. I didn't want to see the contempt in his eyes if I admitted how weak I had truly become. "No, I'll be fine." He nodded once, already turning away. "Then clean this up before you cut yourself." And just like that, he left me there in the dim kitchen, the pain burning through me, the shards of glass still glittering at my feet. I sat for a long time, too weak to move, tears streaming silently down my face. I thought of the times when he had fallen as a child off his bicycle, down the stairs, even once into the riverbank near our home. Each time, I had run to him without hesitation, scooped him into my arms, kissed his scraped knees, whispered, "You're safe, my son. Father is here." And now, when I had fallen, when I was the one broken and afraid, all I received was impatience, a cold grip, and a reminder to clean this up. That night, I did not sleep. The pain in my body was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. For the first time, I feared the truth I had been avoiding for months. The next time I fell, he might not even come at all. The visit to the doctor. After the night I fell, the pain in my hip never truly left me. Each step became heavier, each movement slower, as if my body had aged 10 years in a single evening. I tried to hide it from him, tried to pretend I was fine, but the truth could not be concealed forever. Even he noticed when I grimaced climbing the stairs, or when I winced bending down to pick something up. One morning, he stopped in the hallway, watching me struggle to tie my shoes. "Father," he said sharply, "this can't go on. You need to see a doctor." For a fleeting moment, my heart lifted. Perhaps this was concern. Perhaps he finally cared. But then I saw the expression on his face. It was not worry. It was irritation. He was tired of my weakness, tired of the burden I had become. Still, I nodded. "Yes, son. Perhaps you're right." He booked the appointment without asking me, his fingers tapping rapidly on his phone. "Tomorrow morning, don't be late." His voice was clipped, as though he were arranging a business meeting rather than caring for his father. The next day, we drove in silence. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window as the city blurred past. Memories surfaced of another drive, decades ago, when I had taken him to the hospital after he broke his arm falling from a tree. He had cried the whole way, his little hand clutching mine, and I had whispered again and again, "Don't worry, son, I'm here." Now, the roles were reversed, or at least, they should have been. But he sat with one hand on the wheel, the other scrolling his phone at red lights, barely glancing at me. At the clinic, the doctor examined me carefully. He was gentle, patient, and thorough in a way my own son no longer was. After x-rays and questions, he sat across from us, his voice calm but serious. "Your father has significant damage in his hip," the doctor explained. "The fall has worsened his condition. At his age, he must be careful. He needs support at home, and perhaps even a change in lifestyle. Proper meals, supervision, assistance with daily tasks. Without these, his health will decline rapidly." I sat silently, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my eyes fixed on the floor. The words were like heavy stones pressing down on me. Support, supervision, assistance. They sounded like chains, like admissions of helplessness I wasn't ready to make. My son sighed loudly. "So you're saying he can't live alone anymore?" The doctor hesitated. "I'm saying he shouldn't, not without someone checking in on him daily, at the very least." I dared to glance at my son. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. I knew that look. It wasn't fear, it was resentment. On the drive home, he spoke at last, his voice hard. "Father, you heard the doctor. You need someone to take care of you. I can't do everything. I have work. I have my own life. You need to start thinking about other options." My chest tightened. "Other options?" I asked softly. "You know what I mean," he said, not looking at me. "A facility. Somewhere they can watch you, feed you, make sure you don't hurt yourself again." The words cut deeper than any pain in my hip. A facility. He was already imagining a life for me away from him, away from the home I had built with my own hands, away from the very son I had sacrificed everything for. I turned back to the window, blinking rapidly to hide the tears. "I don't want that," I whispered. "This is my home. I just want to be with you." He didn't answer. The silence between us was colder than ever. That night, as I lay in bed, the doctor's words echoed in my mind. Support, supervision, assistance. I needed them, yes, but what I wanted, what I begged for, was something no doctor could prescribe: a son's love. And I feared more than ever that it was the one medicine I would never receive. The first time he left me without dinner. It happened on a Tuesday evening, the kind of day where the sky darkens early, where the chill in the air slips through the cracks of the windows and lingers in your bones. I remember sitting at the table, waiting. I had set out a single plate, a single fork, a glass of water. I no longer dared to expect more. He had said that morning, "I'll bring dinner home tonight. Don't bother cooking, Father." His voice was impatient, but I caught a flicker of something I wanted to believe was kindness. Maybe he was finally thinking of me. So I waited. The clock ticked loudly, each second stretching longer than the last. At 7, I told myself, he's just late from work. At 8, I whispered, traffic, maybe. At 9, the hunger gnawed at my stomach, but still, I waited. By 10, I couldn't deny it anymore. He wasn't coming. The table sat before me, empty but for the single plate, mocking me with its stillness. I shuffled to the kitchen, opening the cabinets. Nothing but stale bread and a half-empty jar of peanut butter. My hands trembled as I spread it on the dry crust, chewing slowly, each bite filling my mouth with bitterness. When the door finally creaked open near midnight, he stumbled in. His hair was messy, his shirt untucked, and the smell of alcohol clung to him like a second skin. "Where were you?" I asked softly, my voice already broken. He dropped his keys on the counter, avoiding my gaze. "Out," I swallowed. "You said you'd bring dinner." He looked at me then, his eyes narrowing. "God, Father, can't you handle one evening without me holding your hand? You're not a child." The words stung deeper than any slap. I lowered my eyes, ashamed, though I didn't know why. "I wasn't asking for much," I murmured. "Just a meal. Together," he scoffed, pulling off his jacket. "You always want something. Food, company, attention. I'm exhausted. Can't you just stop needing me so much?" I wanted to tell him that I didn't need luxury, or gifts, or even comfort. I only needed the presence of the boy I had raised, the man I had hoped would never forget me. But the words caught in my throat. That night, I lay in bed, my stomach empty, my heart heavier than ever. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the sound of his laughter, echoing faintly from the other room as he spoke to someone on the phone. Laughter he hadn't shared with me in years. It was then I realized something terrible. Hunger was not the worst pain. Loneliness was, and I was starving for something far greater than food. The first night he left me without dinner was not the last. It became a pattern, an unspoken routine. Each skipped meal chipped away at me, not only in body, but in spirit. I learned to hide scraps of bread, to drink water until the emptiness dulled. I told myself I was strong, that I could endure. But deep inside, the child in me still waited at that table, hoping, always hoping, for the sound of a door opening and a son walking in with arms full of warmth. That sound never came. The silent nights. The nights grew quieter after that. Too quiet. I used to think silence was a gift, a chance to rest, to breathe, to listen to the calm rhythm of life. But now, silence was something else entirely. It was heavy, suffocating. It pressed against the walls of the house, echoing in every corner, filling the spaces where laughter and conversation used to live. Each evening, after my son left or locked himself in his room, I would sit at the edge of my bed, staring into the darkness. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the wooden beams above, the distant barking of a dog outside. But there was no voice calling my name, no footsteps approaching my door, no warmth of company. I tried to occupy myself. Sometimes I'd open an old photo album, running my fingers over the faded pictures of him as a boy, his toothy smile, the way his small arms used to cling to me after a nightmare. Other times I would take out my late wife's shawl, still faintly carrying her scent after all these years, and drape it over my shoulders, pretending she was near. But the silence always returned, louder than before. One night, I couldn't bear it anymore. I knocked gently on his door. "Son," I whispered, "may I sit with you for a while?" The door cracked open, and his irritated face appeared. "What is it, Father? I'm busy." I just wanted someone to talk to," I said, my voice trembling. He sighed heavily. "It's midnight. Can't you see I need rest? Go back to your room." And with that, the door shut in my face. I stood there in the hallway, feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. Smaller than the man who had once worked 2 jobs to put food on the table. Smaller than the father who had carried him on his shoulders so he could see fireworks in the sky. Smaller even than the broken old man I saw in the mirror each morning. I shuffled back to my room and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. My chest ached, not just from age, but from the weight of memories. The silent nights began to play tricks on me. I started hearing voices where there were none, my wife's gentle call, my son's childish laughter, even the barking of a dog we once owned. For a moment, my heart would leap, thinking they were real. But then the silence returned, colder than before, mocking me for believing in ghosts of the past. One particular night stands out in my memory. A storm raged outside, rain beating against the windows, thunder rattling the house. I sat alone in the dark, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the fury of the sky. I thought of all the storms I had shielded him from when he was young, how I would hold him close, telling him that thunder was nothing more than angels moving their furniture. He had believed me, and that belief had kept him calm. Now, I was the one trembling in the dark, and there was no one to hold me. The silence in those nights was not empty, it was filled with absence. The absence of love, the absence of care, the absence of the son I thought I knew. And as each night passed, I felt myself fading, piece by piece, into that silence. The forgotten birthday. I had never thought much of birthdays. When I was young, they were simple affairs, my mother baking a small cake, my father patting my shoulder with pride. Later, when I became a husband and father myself, birthdays were no longer about me, but about them. My wife's gentle smile when I surprised her with flowers, my son's gleeful eyes as he tore open his presents. Their joy had always been my celebration, but as the years passed and my wife was gone, only one joy remained, my son remembering. A call, a small cake, even just the words, "Happy birthday, Father," that was enough to warm me through the long winters of old age. This year was different. I woke early that morning, my heart oddly light, despite the stiffness in my body. I dressed carefully, choosing the shirt my wife had once said made me look handsome. I brushed my thin white hair, polished my worn shoes, and even set out 2 cups on the kitchen table, one for me, one for him. I told myself he would remember. He had to remember. All day, I waited. The morning light turned to afternoon, then to dusk. I sat by the window, watching the street below. Every sound of footsteps made me turn my head. Every ring of the phone made my heart skip. But there was nothing. At 7 in the evening, he finally came home. He carried no bag, no cake, no smile. His phone was pressed to his ear, his words sharp and impatient as he argued with someone about work. He didn't even glance at me as he walked past. "Son," I said softly, my voice filled with the fragile hope of a child. He held up a finger, signaling me to wait, then shut himself in his room. I sat at the table, staring at the 2 cups I had placed there in the morning. My hands trembled as I poured myself some tea. It was bitter, far more bitter than usual. Hours passed. The house grew quiet again. Finally, I heard his door creak open. He stepped into the kitchen, grabbing a bottle of water. "Son," I whispered, gathering all the courage left in me, Do you know what today is?" He frowned. "Tuesday." I forced a small smile. "It's my birthday." He blinked, surprised, then shrugged. "Oh, right. Well, happy birthday, Father. Sorry, I've been busy." And just like that, he turned and walked away. No hug, no card, not even a moment of shared warmth. Just words thrown carelessly over his shoulder, as though my 70 years on this earth were worth no more than a casual remark. When the door closed behind him, I lowered my head onto the table. My chest tightened, my eyes burned, but no tears came. It was as if I had grown too old even to cry. That night, I lit a single candle from the drawer, stuck it into a piece of stale bread, and whispered to myself, "Happy birthday." The flame flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. I stared at it until it burned out, leaving me in darkness. It was then I understood. The worst pain is not when others forget you. It is when your own flesh and blood, your only son, remembers, but simply doesn't care. The day, I collapsed in the kitchen. It was early morning when it happened. The house was quiet, as always, and the pale light of dawn was just beginning to spill across the floorboards. I had risen from bed slowly, my body stiff, my hip aching worse than usual. My stomach growled, reminding me that the last meal I had was a small piece of bread the night before. I shuffled into the kitchen, each step heavy, my hand trailing along the wall for support. I opened the cupboard empty, except for a few dry crackers. I reached for them, but my fingers shook. My vision blurred for a moment, black spots clouding the edges. Then suddenly, my knees gave way. I remember the sound first, the crash of my body hitting the cold tile floor, the mug in my hand shattering beside me. Then came the pain, sharp, blinding, radiating through my hip and up my spine. For a moment, I could not breathe. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the taste of dust in my mouth, the world spinning. I tried to call for him, for my son, but the words stuck in my throat. My voice was barely a whisper, weaker than the hum of the refrigerator. Son, there was no answer. Minutes passed, maybe hours, I could not tell. The cold seeped into my bones. I pressed my palm against the floor, tried to push myself up, but my strength failed. My body trembled, sweat dripping down my temples. In those endless moments, memories returned, unbidden. I saw myself decades ago, carrying my boy on my shoulders when he was too tired to walk. I remembered staying awake through the night when he was sick with fever, pressing cool cloths to his forehead, whispering prayers into the darkness. I remembered the day he took his first steps, how I had cheered, clapping, tears in my eyes. Now, here I was, an old man, broken, lying helpless on the same floor I had once danced with his mother upon. Finally, I heard the creak of a door. His footsteps echoed down the hallway. Relief surged in me like a drowning man glimpsing the shore. "Son," I croaked again, my voice ragged. He appeared in the doorway, his expression blank. His eyes scanned me, an old man crumpled on the floor, a broken mug beside him, hands trembling. For a moment, I thought I saw concern flash in his gaze. My heart leapt with fragile hope, but then he sighed. "Father, what now?" I fell," I whispered. "I can't get up." He rubbed his forehead with annoyance. "Every week it's something. If you can't even stand, how am I supposed to manage you?" His words struck me harder than the fall itself. "Please," I murmured, my hand reaching toward him. He hesitated, then finally stepped forward, grabbing my arm roughly and pulling me to my feet. Pain shot through my hip and I gasped, but he didn't slow, didn't soften. He set me down in a chair and shook his head. "This can't go on," he muttered. "You're going to kill yourself one of these days and drag me down with you." I wanted to tell him I didn't mean to be a burden. I wanted to beg him for patience, for compassion, for the smallest scrap of kindness, but the words stayed inside, locked behind the weight of shame. He turned away, already on his phone, muttering something about looking into options. I sat there, clutching the edge of the table, my body trembling. I stared at the cracks in the floor tiles, the shards of the broken mug glinting faintly in the light, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone. The day I collapsed in the kitchen was not just a moment of weakness. It was the beginning of the end. The neighbors, who noticed. It was not my son who first saw the truth of my decline. It was the neighbors. For weeks, I had been moving more slowly, my body bent, my steps dragging across the pavement whenever I managed to step outside. I tried to hide it, to hold my head high, but I knew the sight of me was a shadow of the man I used to be. The day I collapsed. It began like any other day, though I suppose deep down I knew something was different. My body had been weakening for weeks. Each morning, I woke with less strength than the day before. My hands trembled even when lifting a cup of water. My legs wavered under my own weight, and the walk from my bed to the kitchen felt like crossing an entire desert without rest. That morning, I rose slowly, clutching the edge of the bed for balance. The cold was merciless. My joints ached as though sharp blades twisted within them. My stomach growled, hollow and painful, but I dared not disturb my son. He had made it clear my hunger was my burden. I managed to shuffle into the kitchen. The light was dim, the shelves nearly bare. I reached for a loaf of bread, hard as stone, and tried to slice it with trembling hands. The knife slipped, clattering against the counter, and in that small sound, I heard the echo of my own fragility. "Just a little strength," I whispered to myself. "Just enough to get through today." But my body betrayed me. A wave of dizziness washed over me, so sudden it felt as if the world itself tilted. The room blurred, spinning wildly, and my knees buckled. I reached for the table, but my fingers slipped against the cold wood, and then I fell. The crash was louder than I expected. My body struck the floor with a thud, and the knife slid out of reach. Pain shot through my ribs, sharp and merciless. I lay there, gasping, unable to rise. From the hallway, I heard my son's door open. His footsteps approached, slow and heavy. For a fleeting moment, hope flickered in me. Perhaps he would kneel down, lift me up, ask if I was hurt. Perhaps, just once, he would remember I was his father. He stood over me, his face shadowed in the dim light. His expression was not concern but irritation. "What now?" he muttered. I can't get up," I whispered, my voice cracked with shame. "Please, help me." He sighed, long and impatient, as though I had ruined his day by collapsing. For a moment, he did nothing, just stared at me with cold eyes. Finally, he reached down, not gently, but roughly grabbing my arm and yanking me to my feet. Pain shot through me, but I bit back a cry. "You need to stop this nonsense," he said sharply. "You make everything harder than it has to be." "I didn't choose this," I murmured, but the words were swallowed by his indifference. He guided me to a chair, almost shoving me into it, then turned away. "Stay there. Don't move around so much." His footsteps retreated, his door slammed, and I was alone again. I sat in the chair, shaking, my breath shallow. Tears welled in my eyes, not just from the pain in my body, but from the greater pain in my heart. In that moment, I realized how invisible I had become to him. My collapse, my suffering, my weakness, none of it stirred compassion. To him, I was not a father anymore. I was a burden, a weight he carried reluctantly, something to be endured until it was gone. I stared at the floor where I had fallen, the faint outline of dust disturbed by my body. It felt like a mark of my existence, fragile and temporary, soon to be swept away and forgotten. That night, lying in my bed, every breath shallow and every muscle aching, I whispered into the darkness, "If this is how I leave this world unseen, unloved, uncared for, then let it be swift, for I am tired, so very tired." But still, morning came, and with it, the unbearable knowledge that I would have to endure yet another day. The final goodbye, the night after I collapsed, was colder than any I had ever known. Not because of the weather, though the winter wind howled mercilessly outside, but because something inside me had shifted. My body felt fragile, like a cracked vessel barely holding together. Every breath rattled in my chest, shallow and uneven. My hands, once strong enough to build a home, now trembled even when lying still. I knew, with a certainty deeper than fear, that my time was drawing near. For hours, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The shadows seemed longer, darker, almost alive. Memories flickered through my mind like a reel of faded film. My wife's laughter, my son's tiny hand clutching mine as he took his first steps, the warmth of summers long gone when the world seemed kinder and full of promise. I thought of the letter I had written, the one I never gave him. I wondered if he would ever find it after I was gone. I prayed silently that, when he read it, he would feel something: regret, sorrow, even just a flicker of recognition that I had once been his father, that I had once mattered. Sometime in the night, I rose from my bed, each movement heavy and labored. My legs felt like stone, but I forced myself into the living room. The old chair by the window still stood there, facing the emptiness of the street beyond. I lowered myself into it, the wood creaking under my weight, and pulled a thin blanket over my shoulders. The chair across from me, the empty chair at the dining table, seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. I stared at it, and in my weary mind, I no longer saw emptiness. I saw her, my wife, her smile gentle, her hands folded in her lap, waiting, and beside her, I saw my son, not the man he had become, but the boy he once was, his eyes bright, his laughter ringing, his innocence unbroken. "Is it time?" I whispered into the darkness, and in the silence, I thought I heard an answer, not with my ears, but with my soul. Yes. My breaths grew slower, weaker. The cold no longer hurt. It was fading, softening, as though the world was finally letting me rest. My eyelids grew heavy, but before they closed, I whispered one last plea, a prayer that clung to the remnants of my strength. Forgive me if I failed you. Forgive him if he forgot me, and let me find warmth again where she is waiting. The world blurred, then quieted, then slipped away. Morning came, and with it, the sound of my son's door opening. He called my name once, twice, his voice sharp with annoyance. No answer came. When he finally found me, I was sitting in the chair by the window, my blanket drawn close, my eyes closed, my body still. For the first time in years, his voice trembled. "Dad?" he whispered, shaking my shoulder. But I did not stir. He stepped back, his eyes scanning the room, landing on the old wooden box left slightly ajar. Something compelled him to open it. Inside, he found her scarf, her ring, and the letter with his name on it, written in shaky, desperate handwriting. He hesitated before unfolding it, but when his eyes fell upon the words, his face changed. The cold mask he had worn for so long cracked, and tears welled in his eyes. His lips trembled as he read the words I had written in the quiet of my sorrow, the words I had been too afraid to say aloud. By the time he looked back at me, tears streamed down his face. He dropped to his knees, clutching my lifeless hand, his voice breaking with anguish. "Father, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But it was too late. The words I had longed to hear, the remorse I had prayed for, came only after silence had claimed me. And so the house, once filled with warmth and laughter, bore witness to a different sound, the sound of a son's belated grief, echoing through empty rooms, mingling with the cold winter air, for I was gone. But perhaps, at last, he would remember. The final goodbye had been spoken, not by me, but through the tears of the son who had promised care, yet left me hungry and alone each night.